Hi everybody, I'm Alex Gruhin. I'm head of field marketing and brand experiences here at NovoEd. We are at DevLearn in Las Vegas at the Mirage, and I'm sitting here with Michael Ioffe, who is the CEO and founder of Arist. Michael, you're giving a talk here this week about future modalities of learning and best practices therein. I have a few questions for you. What's that talk going to be about? If you look into the future, what do you see?
Sure thing. So the talk is primarily going to be about how learning leaders can meet people where they are. I think what we're finding is that especially during the pandemic, workforces are kind of all over the place, right? You have remote employees that are located geographically all over the place, but also frontline employees are super busy, managers and executives are swamped. And so what we're noticing is that a lot of our clients are finding it very, very difficult to meet people where they are. What we're noticing is that the learning modalities of the future are modalities that we're already using for communications, right? Tools like Teams, like Slack, like email and text message that we already use on a day-to-day basis, and really just activating those as really effective learning modalities and delivering learning where people spend their time instead of having people coming to a learning platform.
Very cool. So what are some of the most difficult challenges in catalyzing a remote workforce?
So we find is that, like I briefly mentioned, the fact that remote workforces are fully distributed, and the fact that, I think historically, learning could be centered around an event, right? Yeah. Like we could bring people together on the same time zone for either a virtual instructor-led training or an in-person training, right? And obviously in-person is no longer possible with remote work, but also getting people, for an hour-long block in the same time zone is oftentimes impossible.
Yeah.
Remote work. It's like super hard, And so what we find is that, finding ways to meet people where they are in bite-sized chunks, making learning smaller and more personal is probably the biggest challenge that our clients are experiencing, and it's the most important challenge ahead of us.
So I'm wondering, how do you train a remote workforce for optimal, efficient organizational output given these strange contexts in which we're playing now?
Yeah, sure thing. So two things that we really think about. One is being incredibly intentional about what the learning outcomes are, right? What we often find is that a lot of our clients oftentimes don't have a clear understanding of what the learning outcome is and build up to a learning outcome instead of taking the learning outcome and working backwards from it. Right? I think if you work backwards from what your learning outcome is and design learning accordingly, and also make learning a continuous experience instead of a one-time experience, it's much more likely to sort of have the learning outcomes that people actually want.
So you talk about continuous experience and long-term experience. How do you define experience? I mean, experience is so ubiquitous here and elsewhere.
Sure.
Like immersive experience, digital experience that I'm finding at Resorts World. Like what is experience?
Yeah. For us, we define a learning experience as the pairing of new knowledge introduction or knowledge introduction of some kind, whether it's old knowledge or new knowledge, paired with some sort of action, whether that's an exercise, whether that's some sort of assessment, right? Like the balance between knowledge and action is critical, and we find that combination strung together in a way that creates some sort of meaningful learning outcome is what we consider an experience.
So it's like wrestling match between those two things in service of a mission.
In service of a mission, right.
That's fascinating. So I have to ask you, since we're sitting here at a table, tell me a little bit about Tile.org.
So Tile is one of the world's largest entrepreneurship education nonprofits. So I founded it when I was 15, so about 7 years ago. And Tile helps Tile helps deliver learning in about 500 cities in over 50 countries.
That's pretty amazing.
It's been a fun time, yeah.
I was going to say, so you look back on your entire career, and look at all these extraordinary accomplishments, like what sticks out to you as your proudest achievement as yet?
Probably one of my proudest achievements was helping deliver learning and training in the Yemeni war zone. So,
wow.
And that's the way that Arist got started. For us, we started realizing that video courses and online learning was simply not accessible to students who don't have internet or laptop access, which was the case in most of the world. And so I think just realizing that we could still find a way to deliver learning there, was probably one of the things that I was proudest of and really catalyzed our work with Arist today.
In closing, if you were to tell one thing to people here at DevLearn that are looking for the cutting edge and learning science and the next generation of tools and technologies, and what is the one thing that they should be looking out for when they are walking about this expo hall and going into this general sessions?
Yeah, sure. We encourage people to think about this. People spend maybe 7 minutes a week in an LMS on average, right? And people spend 40 to 50 hours a week connected to tools like text message, Slack, Microsoft Teams, right? And so I think one thing that we encourage people to think about is bring learning to where people spend their time, right? And that's the best way to achieve the engagement, adoption, and behavior change that people want. So
that's huge. Thanks so much, Michael. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Of course.